Hello, y'all. My name is Christian White, the One Day at a Time Dad. Continuing on with my Listening to Learn series, I am with Suzie McGlone. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
She is super nervous, so she made me a little nervous, so y'all are going to have to work with both of us at this point. So this is my first time interviewing you, so like I always start, like, what are your earliest childhood memories?
And I knew this question was the first question because I've seen your interviews. So I should have thought about this more. But I remember probably when I'm like 3, I know when I was 4 years old we moved. So I remember moving from one house to another.
Who's we?
My family moved.
As in?
My mom and my dad, and at that time, 4 siblings. So 5 children altogether.
And where do you fit in the sibling rank?
I'm 4th.
Okay. 4th youngest.
No, fourth from oldest.
Okay.
Yeah, brother, sister, then me.
Okay.
And then my brother, and then my younger sister.
And why do you remember that particular time?
I just remember us moving and like packing up stuff. And I think my sister recently brought this up, but she had lost, I think, her Minnie Mouse ring or something she got from Disney World. So I remember that. And I think I was 4 when we moved. So I remember us looking all around for that when we were moving from the house. We never found it, sadly. So I have like really hard childhood memories.
Traumatizing, no doubt. No, but that's the beauty of this, because everybody has their own story. That's the point of trying to get these stories out. So moving along, what was your childhood in general like, in terms of what were your mom and dad like? What were your siblings like? How did you fit into that world?
I had pretty much, I would think, an ideal childhood. I was always able to play with somebody because I had siblings around me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also had, and still have, thank goodness, really wonderful parents who were good examples for me and were also kind to us. And like I said, they were good examples of being kind to other people. And, when we moved to a house in downtown Fredericksburg, and I remember that.
Virginia,
yes. We moved from.
Is that where you're from?
Yeah, I was born in Fredericksburg, and we lived in one house in Stafford, which is right outside of Fredericksburg, and then we moved to downtown. And when we lived downtown, we were close to a lot of things, so we walked everywhere. And we had what we called a clubhouse in our backyard, so the person who'd owned the house before us was a minister of some type, so it was his office, but it was like a room over the garage.
Minister as in religion, or minister as in
religion.
Finance? Okay.
And it was funny when we first moved there. Also, the house has an unfinished basement, like with dirt floors. And I remember we went down to the basement, and there were all of these like Nixon sucks because, and this will give away my age, but it was 1973. So they had written on the walls of the basement things about Nixon. There was a lot of hippie stuff because I think his older kids were really into politics, I guess. And but anyway, the clubhouse, which was because there was a separate garage from the house, and the clubhouse was 3 rooms that he built above that with a separate staircase going up, and so we used that as our clubhouse. So it was really nice. We had a lot of fun spaces to play in because we would play there. We made a garden. Like my mom let us pretty much do whatever we wanted. So we had a garden in the backyard we'd use, and there was an alley right behind our house, and then right behind that alley was my best friend's house.
Let me interject. Question.
Yeah.
When you think of your mom's parenting style, in terms of let them explore as long as they're kind of physically safe type of thinking, do you feel that benefited you later on by having that freedom as a child?
Definitely. I mean, we always had that amount of freedom. I think it was maybe another time where parents didn't plan every minute of their child's day. I mean, my mom had 6 kids, so she's not going to micromanage us, but she knew in general where we were, somewhere within the neighborhood, within 3 or 4 blocks. And I think it did benefit all of us because we are still able to be playful and have fun with playing games and using our imagination. I mean, if you meet any of my siblings, they're very imaginative and they like to have fun and they like to interact.
Do all of them have a sense of family like you do?
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, my family was a little bit off in some senses, but I always try to listen to people who had great relationships growing up, just to try to understand like what those healthy attachments look like from a very early age. So you're a teacher, correct?
Yes.
How long have you been teaching for?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I started teaching in 1992, but then
In public school?
Actually, you know what? When I first went to apply, I went to Washington, D.C. public schools.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, Washington, D.C., it always had reasons why it didn't start on time. Like, they would start, like, weeks late because of asbestos or because, I mean, it was just a really disorganized public school system. And if you know, Washington, D.C. is about 90% black, and it's, I think just now it's maybe going to become a state, but it was never really supported properly the way. So I wanted to teach in Washington D.C. public schools, but I didn't. They called me after I already had a job, and I got really scared, and I took a job, of all things, at a private Catholic school, and I'm not even Catholic, but so that's where I started teaching, was in a school.
Why did you make the choice to go to when you say like you were sort of scared, what was the issue?
Well, I mean, I didn't have a job, and it was the weekend. I mean, I remember I got the job in August because the year I graduated.
You needed to be employed before school started.
I'm not
okay,
from
that's what I wanted. Okay.
Like, I don't have like just money.
No, that's not what I meant. I'm saying that you needed to be on somebody's payroll before school started.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah, and so that school system hired me instead of DC.
That's
and
what
DC
I mean.
called me like right on Labor Day weekend actually, and they were like, "Oh, do you need a job or do you want to work for us?" And I had already taken a job.
Let me ask. I mean, when I think of DC public school, Boston public school, New York's public school, all of these public schools, my first thought isn't, I want to work in those districts because I hate being around certain types of people. Like, that's not going to be the motivational factor about that. I mean, you're a Boston public school teacher now. Why public school?
Well, I went to public school my whole life.
Okay.
And I had a very good education. And I'll say this, like, education in my family is important in some ways, but it's not like how it is in other families. I know they're like all about education. Like, if I hadn't gone to college, my mom would have been okay with that. I mean, I recognize, a lot of that has to do with my privilege and everything, that I can say I don't want to go to college. I mean, it's not like my mom and dad would have given me money to do something else, and they didn't give me money to go to college. For the most part, I did that. But, when I say I had a good education, I did because of the people who taught me, and they were excellent teachers. And
teachers, as in plural, more than one?
I had excellent teachers all the way through. And, I mean, I'm sure there was probably one or two that I don't remember, but I remember from kindergarten on having great teachers, and I value that, who were great people. And I'm not talking about teachers who got me ready for an Ivy League or teachers who got me ready to memorize. I'm talking about teachers who helped me love to learn.
So you were taught to be a thinker?
I think so. That's what I remember about school. I mean, maybe.
So I mean, obviously they were positive, but like, if you can think of, I guess, a general sensation or feeling in terms of how did you feel when you felt these positive messages at that age coming through? So.
Well, I mean, we just had a lot of creativity in my school. We had.
What was the makeup of your school in terms of color?
I think it was probably mainly just black and white, and probably somewhere I have a picture of my kindergarten class. I should have. It's right over there, but
no big deal.
Probably I'll show it later. Probably about 30% black, and the rest white.
So let me ask: when you were younger, or you're getting older now when you're in school, When you moved at 3 or 4 to that new place, was that home for the continuation of?
Yeah, that was home until I went to college.
Okay, so you were settled. Were there any differences in the messages that you received or were given to you versus what you may have saw some of your other classmates get?
You mean as far as from their families or from different teachers?
From the school environment.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think what I saw. You know, our school was kind of a funny school, and my class was a funny class in that my class, I graduated in 1987,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember my class was very competitive. There were people there that were very competitive, and I know that they probably got certain messages. I never took advanced English or any of that, because I didn't, even back then I did not believe in that. I didn't believe in taking advanced work. I thought that was I just remembered I didn't like it. I didn't believe in it. And also I think there might have been like 1 or 2 teachers that were teaching the advanced work classes that I might not have wanted for teachers, so maybe that is something.
Interesting.
I remember we took the PSATs,
Mm-hmm.
and I only took them, like if I had to go back, I wouldn't have taken them, because I guess they were practice. I would not have, because I was paying for that with my own money. And then I remember my friends were like, oh, you better take classes, because even back then in the 80s they had classes to prepare you for SATs. And I was like, I will never pay to prepare for a class for a test, because I thought that was ridiculous. And so I do know there were, especially when I got to high school, there were more teachers that kind of probably sought to try to track people.
Mm-hmm.
And I had always been, in kindergarten they had tested me and they said I was gifted. So from then on I was put in, and I'm sure they had some kind of tracking at our school in those days, but I remember we had a gifted class that I was in throughout my elementary, and when I got to 5th grade I wanted to get out of it, because it was the year, I don't remember anything, but then I'll remember stuff like this. It was the year that Ronald Reagan was running for president, and I remember basically everyone in that gifted class wanted him to win,
Mm-hmm.
and I wanted Jimmy Carter, and also I didn't like the death penalty, and other people did, so I just wanted to get out of that gifted class. And my mom tried to get me out, but they wouldn't let me get out in the middle of the year. So when I went to 6th grade, I wasn't in gifted anymore.
How'd you become so aware of your white privilege?
I think it must be my parents.
First of all, what do you understand it to mean?
Well, I mean, I think I'm still becoming aware of it, but I mean, I know that I have a lot of things easier than people who aren't white women or white men. I mean, I live in Boston right now, you know, and I know that when I walk to work, I see people who probably didn't mess up any more than me, didn't try any more than, I mean, I've never stayed up all night to study for a test. I just don't do that. And so I don't think I've ever tried, especially if it's something that I find boring. Like, I'll try stuff that I think is interesting, but I guess my point is I've never tried that hard, and I have a pretty, like what I would say, a pretty nice life, and right now a good salary and things like that. I get this apartment easily, and you know, I know that I have parents. At least my grandparents went to college, maybe even great grandparents. I don't even know, and that's a privilege in itself that I don't have to really think about that. And just that I also, like with my mom and my dad not pushing me to go to school or do anything in particular, because it was probably kind of a given that I would be okay, because I didn't have any, you know, disabilities or any sort of
disabilities, which could be skin color.
Yeah,
in that
I mean,
sense
I'm
too.
trying. I was trying to think of the
Nope,
right word.
nope. I think that as soon as you said it.
Well, no, I was thinking like, I mean, I have a sister who is deaf, and
Yes,
that's made it
yes.
more difficult.
That's what hit me for like little Christian autism, things like that. But then I'm
Mhm.
like, wait a minute. that extra, the black tax, all these sorts of things
Yeah,
are.
so
right,
and I also grew up with black teachers in my school. I was shocked when I came to Boston 21 years ago, and people I met in Boston said they had never had a black teacher in school. And I had read Jonathan Kozol before I came here. Jonathan Kozol worked in Roxbury. He's a white man. And he wrote Savage Inequalities, but he also wrote Death at an Early Age, which describes, an overabundance of white teachers teaching black kids in Roxbury.
Let me ask you this.
Okay.
I mean, I know you. So, I mean, I know you have a great heart.
Do?
I know you have a great heart. How important, even with that said, even with all the love that you pour into your students, why is it important for them to see teachers like them pouring that same love into them?
Oh, there's a lot of reasons why. Because, first of all, it's important. You're talking about why should my students, who are mostly black, Cape Verdean, Latinx, see teachers who have similar backgrounds. For one thing,
and look similar.
That's what I'm saying. Look similar. For one thing, it's researched that actually black and white students learn better from teachers of color, and specifically black teachers. So that's one thing, and I'm not sure about why, what the research, I think they're still looking into why that is.
Well, I mean, I'm more so like, this is you. I want, like, when you go to work every day. I mean, it's COVID-19, but there's still online classes, but you show up for work every day, and your hope for your students is what?
Well, I want them to be able to know that they can self-actualize and to be their, I don't know, I'm trying to say it in a way that's not cliche, but I really want them to be able to grow in any direction just like I was allowed to. And I think the messages by having mostly white teachers is that there must be something that's subpar about people who look like them because they're not their teachers. And they're not in control of a lot of important things. Like our mayor is white. There's a lot of people who look white or identify as white who have a lot of control over their lives. And so that, I can say all I want. And I can tell them that I love them and all of that. But there are other messages coming out through what they are just seeing, through what's happening and who's in power and control of a lot of important things in their lives.
This is a random question. I thought of it when we were just talking, but is it impossible for a good heart without resources to stand against the structural piece that comes with schools, corporations, everything? How do you see sort of the way we try to expand the thinking that we need to help these children self-actualize as opposed to follow rules, continue to just memorize things, whatever the case may be? Like, I know for me, like my dad, he kind of promoted in me, be what you want, but don't be too much. There's that trouble element. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that in a lot of black families, and I'm sure it's like that for any minority family, but I noticed like I experienced a lot of kind of that half and half, where it's like, I want you to be great, but I don't want you to do anything that's careful, that's going to put you out there that they'll have to come see you, that type of thinking. When you're in school, how do you balance what you may feel like are injustices and at the same time trying to teach your students the best, in the sense of, because in my mind, if I'm your student, I want to see exactly what you're seeing. That's just me. I'm curious in that sense. But there are certain ways and stuff that you have to speak because you have to be able to be in that system to even, what is that like for you?
Well, I mean, first of all, again, I need to point out that I have a lot of privilege working in Boston Public Schools because I am a white woman, I'm only one, and they have in the system a lot of power. And so start from that.
Can you explain that power a little bit?
Well, we are the majority in that system, and we probably don't have, even though there's not as many, we probably don't have as much power as the white men in the system, but we have a lot of power in that.
But there wasn't even a thought to mention we might have more power than, and
definitely.
The only thing that you could possibly be under is a white man.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I've known that from a very young age too.
Okay.
I mean, I remember being probably about 8 or 9 and like recognizing that. So people that say they don't see color and they don't, I don't know where they've been living, because like I remember distinctly figuring that out when I was like 8 or 9 years old. But so when I walk into an interview, if someone white is interviewing me, I'm gonna immediately put most white people more at ease than if I was a person of color. And so right then, they're going to feel more of a connection. I mean, this is just how race works. And then because I'm white, I might have something in common, like with them in their life, of my white lifestyle and theirs. And I mean, even just if I go to work at a new school and the majority of the people there are white women, at least what I've observed,
and we can assume that when you say that the population of the students is mostly black
in
and
Boston,
brown.
yes.
Okay.
There's a dynamic that I've seen again and again. It's just that white people are more at ease and more comfortable around other white people. Now, they might want to have people of different races around them for different reasons, but a lot of white people are just more comfortable. So if it's my first day at work and I'm walking in, I'm going to have a selection of people to choose from who are like, well, where's the coffee machine? Oh, where do I get a cup of coffee when that time comes? Or can you help me out with a student?
So in some ways, you literally just don't have to go through the extras that...
I walk in with a lot of easy things I'm carrying with me that are, if I make a mistake, like let's say I make a mistake and pronounce a child's name wrong, which is a really bad mistake, and a lot of white women do that. I think in the world of that being a mistake, other white people are gonna be like, oh, I would have done that too, though. That's, you know what I mean? Whereas like people who might be more familiar with those names, or if it's like a Cape Verdean name, or they will say it perfectly, but they will never get that credit, and they will, you know what I'm saying? Like they do a million things very well all of the time that I can't do, and it's not giving them credit. And in fact, it becomes a way that white people bond together, because I'll be like, oh yeah, I say da-da, and I'll say it to another white teacher. Not that I'm saying that, but I'm just saying this is a dynamic that happens, because what white people are always doing is we're always trying to make each other more comfortable.
Why?
Because there's, like everyone's talking about white fragility right now.
Yes.
So, I'm not sure why. I mean, I think that we are always used to being comfortable. Like we are used to being at least in the United States, that's the only place I've ever lived. And we are so used to walking into any place, being the majority, being the person in power. Like when I walk into anywhere, like any location, I walk into the doctor's office. I'm a white woman. I'm probably going to have a European doctor or white doctor. And so I know that they're going to know specifically about me. If let's say I walk into...
Are you, and just so I understand, you're aware of these levels of thinking when you go into these places?
This is what I always think of.
Okay.
But let's say, like, oh, what about if you were in the minority? Let's say I go to that McDonald's over by Orchard Gardens, and then I'm the only white person in there. But you know what? I'm walking in as a white person, and I know that I'm gonna be safe because of how I look.
Yeah.
I also know that those people work at McDonald's. They have no power in some ways to, and it's funny because white people like to make up things in their head like, oh my gosh, I was the only white person there, so I understand how that feels. No, you don't, because you're the only white
a
person
reverse minority.
yeah, like you're the only white person at a McDonald's in a neighborhood that you might deem unsafe, but white people are generally safe in that neighborhood.
They're safer in that neighborhood than the other people in that neighborhood.
Yeah, so I just, like recognizing things like that and dynamics like that.
So, how does that play into your teaching? How do you, I mean, I don't know a lot about lesson plans, things like that, but I'm assuming there's curriculums, there's guidelines, certain things you have to show that you're doing.
Actually teaching?
Actually teaching according to the school system.
Okay.
Above and beyond that, being aware of all these things, how do you lesson plan to sort of plant the seed for your students to self-actualize, even if you know that they may very well go through the ringer for a little while?
Well, I mean, one thing I just have to back up and like, and I tell my students this every day or every first day of school, and I tell them it maybe throughout the year, but it's an honor and a privilege and a responsibility for me to teach them. So I try to get to know parents and respect their parents. And I do not like to have transactional relationships with parents. So in other words, I don't like to, if I was going to call you about little Christian, I don't want every single call or most of my calls to just be about, he didn't do his homework, so this, or he did a good job, even if I said, oh, he did a good job on this, or his behavior, this or that. Those are very transactional conversations that just tell me that I only see you as the person that's going to make this child do this. Even if I call to give you a compliment, I'm still just making it very transactional because I'm messaging to you that I like this, so you want to keep getting positive phone calls. And we're so in tune, parents are so thrown off like, oh, they're getting a positive phone call. Because as teachers, you're always taught like, make a positive phone call before a negative one. But it's always sort of transactional. So I want to get to know my students' families and parents and find out about what they expect from my students. And if what they expect and what they want, obviously within reason, I've never had a parent expect anything unreasonable, is something that's more important or better than what the state or the city of Boston or my principal
in Boston
wants.
itself, do the parents have a lot of say so in what happens?
No. And so I try to disrupt that every day. So I want to know what parents want. And I'm not just talking academics, but how their child's treated, how their child is handled in lunch, like with the lunch situations. At my school, they didn't have enough seats for everyone to sit down at middle school lunch one year. And think about what dynamic that makes you have. First of all, you're in middle school, and who feels good in middle school? Like most people don't. And so that means when you are going into lunch every day, which happens literally every day, 180 days, you're going into lunch and you're hoping that you will get a seat after you've gone through the line.
You want to know what that it's funny you say that because I know exactly what you mean where it comes to certain people. I mean, and I'm including myself in that, certain people and underserved people, all of that, high needs, high risks, whatever the case may be. There's that level of thinking where we know in order for something to go right, everything has to go perfect around it. And it's like, and when I just heard what you said, where it's like you walk into that, and it's funny because my first thought was to say chow hall because that's what we call it in prison. But and in prison you would just fight for a seat if you really wanted to sit down somewhere. But I mean, it's the parallel's kind of sad where a kid's going basically as soon as I get out of that lunch line, I'm hoping that whatever direction I'm walking towards, that seat opens up and there's no one else ready to jump in it.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of fosters that things can only go right if everything about it goes right. And I feel like what it eventually does is take more and more of the choices and the power from the child
Oh
themselves.
yeah, and think about the class period before lunch.
Mhm.
What are you thinking about? And I mean, I have kids that are like, they'll see me in the morning. They're like, Miss McGlone, can I come to your classroom for lunch? Because if they come to my class, then it's going to be cool. And this also at the school I just worked at, that was their only downtime. Like there's no recess for middle schoolers, so that is their only downtime. So now they're stressed, and it's a very loud room. And and I had been told, by a couple of different administrators at times, like, oh, kids can't come into your classroom, or if they are, you've got to make sure that they're coming up with you, and da 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 da. And after a while, and I just ignored certain ridiculous rules that certain people at my school make, because I would rather me get in trouble or me get hurt, my feelings or whatever, than one of my students. It's
Sounds very controlling.
it's very controlling. There are a lot of parallels between school and prison, as you know, just the lines, the uniforms, all of that. It's very
Well, and I mean, I would
emphasized.
say even more than that is how students are talked to, how they're
Oh, yeah.
treated. I mean, in terms of, I think, for the children themselves, I think that there's nothing wrong with the structure, or structure benefits a lot of people, but it's that structure with like that nefarious intent of, you have to do this because this is where you belong. You belong in order.
Mhm.
And that's where I think for me I kind of have that issue. But let me ask. I feel like we could talk for a long time, but I want to ask, would you consider education and the injustices in the public school systems and in the larger society as your biggest fight, as where your heart is? Where do you feel like you fall in everything that's going on in the atmosphere right now? How do you focus your attention when you wish you could save everybody?
So I guess I would say my focus is on the school and my immediate neighborhood. I mean, that's why I like to teach at a school that's where I vote, that district, and I think that's important, because I like to take care of what's immediately around me. That's
Mhm.
very important. As you know, people can live anywhere and teach in Boston. I find that a little bit problematic, but back to what I
You mean the teacher doesn't come from the neighborhood the kids live in?
right.
Oh,
No,
okay.
I'm
Not most anyway.
most of them do not. Like a majority don't. Yeah, you could just take the education system, and it'll look a lot like the healthcare system or whatever system you have in this country, and there is a lot of racial injustice, because that's what our whole country was built on. And so I think where I'm probably most talented is in education and community, so that's where I put my focus. And I love stories. Like I like this series a lot because I like stories, and I think there's a lot to learn from people by hearing their stories, and so that's how I have really focused my work in the last several years, of listening to people's stories, trying to get those stories down, trying to get groups of people who can't go to the library and see their life in a book, or in even 5 or 10 books. Whereas I always tell my students, like, I can go to the library and I would see hundreds of books with people
Yeah,
who have families like mine or
that's
look like
actually
mine.
interesting. I never thought about that particular point, though it's realistic.
So I want those stories out. I mean, that's one of the projects, like I told you I was working on yesterday with the Cape Verdean stories, is to get Cape Verdean people to write their stories and history, because it was not possible to learn all of Cape Verdean history up until recently, at least in school, in a structured educational system. And I think you could parallel that to a lot of things in our system, because we of course have American history, but whose American history do we have? Or even ancient civilizations, or whatever you want to call it, and
Yeah,
there's someone's idea of that. So I think it's really part of self-actualization is understanding where you came from and valuing that, valuing your parents, valuing the lessons that have been passed down.
The good ones.
Yeah, or all kinds of lessons.
All of them. Yeah. That's true.
Because
too.
like.
So let me ask. Last question. What is it that I hate using the word fair. What does and I hate the word adequate. What does a good Boston public school system look like?
Well, I think it's like, actually, to bring it back to the beginning of the interview, it looks like sort of what my mom had set up for us for learning in our backyard. It's something where there's autonomy for the young people. The parent is involved, but doesn't have to be over involved because they already know their child is safe enough to explore. And so the parents can have a life. They don't have to always be going to a fight at the school committee or a fight at City Hall, but they just know that their kids are getting around, exploring gardens, exploring clubhouses. You know, we got to walk to the library. It was 2 blocks from my house, so we were there several times a week in my childhood. So I think a good school system sort of looks like that, just having a lot of autonomy, a lot of creativity, some structure, because we had a little bit of structure, you know, where we could go and what time we'd get back and, you know, what we could do, because we couldn't like dig giant holes. Actually, we never did dig giant holes, so maybe we could have. But we planted gardens. I mean, my dad had a workshop with like saws and stuff.
So
like we would do dangerous things or things people might think are dangerous. But
so let me ask, everything that you just said is attainable. There's enough resources to.
Yes.
Okay. So.
I mean, obviously, it would look a little different in school because we have 55,000 people going to school.
Well, no, but that was my question. What do you see as an ideal Boston public school?
Scaling it up. So, you know, I was in Franklin Park this morning. I go every morning for my walk/run or jog. And you look at that area, and the woman I walk with, she was telling me, and she's lived in Boston since she was a preteen, and she's Cape Verdean, and she's got a lot of friends who live in Boston. She said, just this morning, she goes, you know, a lot of them live right by here, but they never come to Franklin Park. And Franklin Park is beautiful, and it's an untapped resource. So we have a lot of beautiful outdoor spaces in Boston. We have beautiful indoor spaces in Boston. And I think people like, oh, you know, that's not realistic to think about how that could work for 55,000 students. Yes, it is. Boston has a lot of money. And
so
when
in your mind,
you include
everything
the
you're saying is absolutely attainable.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And the thing is, the biggest resource Boston never uses, and I know right now the superintendent is having a difficult time, but is the families in the community. And when I say community, I mean the real community. I'm not talking city year or citizen schools and those more like corporate communities that were sort of the white saviors that came in.
The students in their
But I'm talking about the real community and the people who make the community. I mean, we really have amazing resources with people who can speak 3 and 4 languages, who know several different cultures, who know a lot of amazing skills.
What is one beginning step to getting that done?
I think one beginning step is sort of actually looking at the community and hearing their stories and hearing what they've done and where they've come from. But also hearing the pain. You know, there's, you know, the idea of truth and reconciliation. And I think white people like to get to the reconciliation part because we like to have those kumbaya moments where we're hugging and ebony and ivory and hands across America. And I think that the truth part, which is the really awkward to shameful part of it, it needs to come out first. So we need to have that truth, and we need to, as white people, understand that. And I think other people who are not white or are in less positions of power, you know, are able to really tell that truth of what's happened. And we can all be aware of the pain, because then when you recognize that and you open it up, then we can go to the reconciliation, and then it's a beautiful world because it's it's people, and we've got this beautiful land. So I really do think it's possible, and I don't think that this is that fuzzy or unattainable that people might want it to be.
Okay. Suzie, thank you.
Thank you.
You did great. You weren't. She wasn't nervous at all. That was interesting. Yeah, you weren't.